Hi guys, so today we're reading part 2 of chapter 5, sorry that I forgot yesterday. They were led through to the long burrow and sat down on benches next to the fire. Lady Redwater went off to see that rooms were made ready for them, and some silent shuffling serving rabbits brought out hot buttered parsnips and a few small loaves of bread. As soon as the blood started moving round his body again, Podkin's hands began to shake so badly he could hardly hold his plate. He managed a bite of parsnip eventually, and it burnt and tingled as it slipped down his throat. It was the best feeling he'd ever had. After a little while, the shaking stopped, and he found himself gulping down mouthfuls and tearing through the bread like a starved rabbit. Paz was doing the same, and little Pook even began to move about a bit. His nose wrinkled, and his big eyes peered out from behind Paz's tunic. "Neeps, neeps!" he called, opening his mouth like a baby bird, as Paz spooned hot parsnips inside. As his body thawed out, so did Podkin's wits. He noticed the long burrow was dark and damp. Thick cobwebs filled the corners, and the fire before them was a tiny one nestled amongst huge banks of ash. The fireplace hadn't been swept for months. He looked around at the tables and benches, remembering the feast days of midsummer, when the hall had been packed to the rafters with cheery rabbits. There was hardly any furniture left now, and those chairs, had they been patched up? Was the back of that bench splintered? The food wasn't quite right either. The parsnips were stringy, the bread gritty and burnt on the outside. The last feast day, they had eaten a huge, glorious meal here. There had been a giant carrot, hollowed out so that when it was cut, a cascade of roasted turnips and swedes tumbled over the table. Now that was proper Redwater food, not this hastily cobbled together meal in front of them. Once he'd started noticing one or two little things, his eyes picked out more. Were those gouge marks on the earth wall? What were those dried red stains spattered on the floor? And also, come to think of it, where were the children? The chieftain's children. They had played hide and seek and blind bunny's bluff with every year since he could walk. They were as noisy, loud and bubbly as any Redwater rabbit ever was. If they weren't in the long burrow itself, they should at least be able to hear them shouting and chasing each other somewhere. This was Bramblemas morning after all. There should have been a cluster of little rabbits in the long burrow, all showing off what the midwinter rabbit had brought them in the night. At least, that was always what happened in Mumbury Warren. I had been hoping for a set of wooden soldiers, Podkin thought. He wondered if they had been delivered anyway and were sitting next to his empty bed, or whether the midwinter rabbit knew about the gorm and had kept away. It didn't seem important anymore, even though it had been all he'd thought about for weeks. How quickly your life can turn upside down. "Paz," he whispered, "where do you think Rufus and Rusty are? Wouldn't they have come out to see us if they knew we were here?" Paz nodded. Her eyes had been zipping everywhere, noticing the same things as Podkin. Mostly, she had been staring at a metal sculpture that she hadn't seen before, a tall iron pedestal that jutted up from the long burrow floor. It wasn't a model of anything in particular, just a mass of twists and coils, all jagged, uneven and unfinished. Why do they have an iron statue in their warren? She wondered. Everyone knew that kind of metal was hated by the goddess. And what was it about the thing that set her fair on edge? It reminded her of something, but her poor, frozen, terrified mind couldn't quite place it. And then it came to her. The gorm. She wanted to tell Podkin, but didn't speak. Because two serving rabbits had just entered the room. They were carrying some kind of large box between them, covered over with a thick blanket. They kept to the shadows as they edged their way around the long burrow. They had their heads down, but Paz could see them darting nervous, scared glances at them as they passed. Out through the hallway to the main doors they went. When they were gone, she hissed at Pod. What was that they were carrying? Pod was about to shrug when he heard a muffled cawing sound coming from the hallway. Some kind of animal? A bird? That sound! They had heard it before, just a few short hours ago. Podkin and Paz looked at each other, both thinking the same thought at the same time. It's not a box, but a cage. And inside must be one of the gorm's spy birds, a warped, tortured crow with dead eyes and rusted metal feathers. The bird, the statue, the dead, empty warren. Suddenly, it all made terrible sense. They're working for the gorm, Podkin hissed. They're letting them know we're here. The Gaul must have taken Redwater just like they had Mumbury. Chief Russet must have been killed, his guards murdered, and the rest of the Warren turned into slaves. And as for the children... Podkin didn't like to think. Without his heart and soul, the Warren was slowly dying. They had chosen the worst possible place to run to. "We have to get out," Paz started to say, but Podkin was already up and running. She grabbed Pook and went to follow when, from the corner of her eye, she caught sight of the iron pillar. Something inside it squirmed, juddered, like a fat eel stuck in a shallow puddle of mud. Could that even be possible? And then it made a sound, a grinding, screeching wail that grew louder and louder. She didn't stop to hear any more. Clutching Pook, she dashed after her brother as fast as her quick rabbit legs would carry her. They sprinted out of the long burrow in the opposite direction of the main entrance, just as a shout went up from the gallery above. Someone had been up there watching them, and from the voice it sounded a lot like Lady Russet herself. "Stop them! Don't let them escape!" Into the tunnels of the Warren they ran, the screams echoing behind them. Heading away from the main doors may have seemed a daft thing to do, but Podkin knew there would be guards there. He also knew Warrens had many little back entrances and bolt holes. He could hear his father's voice reciting one of his favourite phrases. A Warren with only one entrance is basically a trap. A trap, like the one they had just walked into. They dashed through dark, winding corridors, changing direction every time they heard footsteps nearby. The Redwater rabbits were closing in on them, hounding them through the tunnels like ferrets used to chase their small fluffy ancestors. Shouting voices echoed behind them, and little Pook began to wail as he was bounced around inside Paz's tunic. "Neeps, neeps!" He could sense his sister's fear, but was also very concerned that his meal had been interrupted. "There!" Paz shouted. "Up ahead!" The tunnel had become lighter, and as they rounded a corner they saw a small open gateway and the snowy forest beyond. They sprinted for it, as fast as terrified rabbits can. As Lady Russet's voice called out behind them, "Seal the Warren! Close the gates!" Slams and bangs began to echo through the passageways, and with numb horror, Podkin saw a metal portcullis begin to grind downwards over the doorway ahead. Their escape was being blocked. They were going to be trapped inside. Sometimes, when your life is in real danger, when everything seems lost, there is a well of energy deep within you that can give you a final, desperate surge of power. It isn't always much, but often it's just enough to scrape through trouble by a whisker. Podkin and Paz reached for theirs now, and doubled their speed down the tunnel as the heavy grille clanked further and further down. Paz reached it first and dropped to her knees, sliding underneath the portcullis's prongs and into the snow. Podkin was a split second behind. He copied his sister, kicking his legs out and falling backwards to skid underneath. Looking up, he saw the roof of the tunnel pass by, the gateway, the fallen portcullis, and then the grey sky of the open air above. "I did it," he thought. "I'm free." But then there came a sharp, searing pain in his ear. He tried to get up, but something was holding his head down, something very painful. He heard Paz scream, and he twisted round to see what had happened. The portcullis was down, and they were on the outside, or at least most of them was. One of his long, silky brown ears was still inside, and speared through it, holding him in place, was a prong of the portcullis. He had been pinned to the ground. He was trapped. I thought there was going to be more then. That's the end of chapter 5, so we'll find out what happens to Podkin and his ear in chapter 6, but I think you can all remember that part. See you tomorrow. Bye.